All right. So we're back for another of our weekly healing membership workshops. And I'm really excited that you're here, especially Leslie, because we had such a good conversation last week. So, we're talking about anti-inflammatory eating this week. And you got a little bit of a background on why anti-inflammatory living is so important last week, but I didn't get into all of the details. So let's see where we are here. I've got some more information to share. And let's see. The important thing to know is, we kind of talked about this in passing last week, but our modern world is pretty pro-inflammatory. So, you can think about how we've got physical and chemical factors that can cause inflammation. That would be a thing that we talked about last time, right? Nutritious food or not having enough nutritious food can cause higher levels of inflammation, things like trans fatty acids that you end up getting in fast food, or very high levels of saturated fat in your foods or high levels of sugar can increase the level of inflammation in your body. Then we've got just chemicals that we're exposed to in the world, like pollutants that can in the air that can increase our level of inflammation. But the whole theme this month is to focus on the ways that social environments and our social experience of the world, beyond just the physical and the chemical, increase the levels of inflammation in our body, and do so really at the genetic level, which is pretty amazing. So, Leslie, you were involved last week. You remember all of this? We covered all this, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. I'm going to be, you know how this is, pretty interactive. I'm going to be referring back to you just because you're the one on the call, right? So you're the one who needs to get something out of this. And if you feel like I'm rehashing something that you already understand, just let me know. I tend to repeat some of these complicated concepts because not everybody's going to get it the first time. But if you already got it, we could just move on.
Okay.
So sounds like you get that part.
Mhm.
Okay,
Absolutely.
good. So then, the next reason that it's really important to live in an anti-inflammatory way, and I don't know if we emphasized this enough last week, is that inflammation is implicated in the development of most of the chronic diseases that kill most of the world. Like, I don't think we talked about that part, but that's why we care about inflammation. So these preventable lifestyle related chronic conditions like obesity, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, type 2 diabetes, that eventually lead to heart attack and stroke, uh, those have chronic inflammation at the root, which is incredible. And then those happen to be the diseases that disproportionately affect Black folks. So there's even more reason for us to focus on counteracting those pro-inflammatory factors, one of which we said last week is racism. Even more reason for us to focus on counteracting that in every healthy habit we have. That includes eating. Okay. And then another thing that we didn't have enough time to cover in detail last time was sort of this idea of exactly how our social experience of the world, how does that even get translated into higher levels of inflammation? And so I said it happens at the genetic level, but it's easier for you to look at a picture as I explain this. So, Leslie, are you somebody who remembers anything that you learned in like high school or college biology class?
Ah, for the most part. For the most
Okay,
part.
that's impressive. That's really impressive. Okay.
I'm not on the level of some people I know. My sister, she's great at that. But I have a decent remembrance.
Good. Okay, so you know what? Uh, if anything sounds familiar, but you want to spend a little bit more time on it, just like, raise your hand and wave. I can see you on the screen. So, um, you remember that there's DNA in our bodies. Everybody has their own set of DNA, and the DNA represents basically the source code for how our bodies can function. And um, those are genes, and not all of our genes are on at any given time, but they get turned on based on the circumstances, based on our body's decision of what needs to be on when to help us live in different ways. So, like, one way to explain it would be, I think one metaphor might be, so you've ever been to the theater, or you've seen a play. um, you can imagine the actors in their rehearsal, they're reading from a script, right? So imagine that you go to this like really new agey play, and every night there's a new script. It's the same play, but maybe the dialogue changes a little bit, or maybe there's like a different character every night. So let's imagine that the way that play gets set up is there is a master script, and the master script is the DNA that has like all the possibilities for what like all the dialogue, all the characters, all the plot twists, all three acts, all the possibilities for what can happen in this play on the master script. But every night they print out a performance script. And in order to print the performance script, they basically like pick and choose pieces of dialogue, pick and choose characters. They might even just leave out an entire scene, right? That performance script is like your RNA. The DNA gets turned into your RNA, the genes get read, but not all the genes, right? They get turned into RNA, and then those get turned into the protein, or the actual stuff that makes up your body. So if the RNA is that performance script, that's what the actors are going out and reading. That's the play you're going to see that night. You might not have any idea that there were all these other possibilities for scenes and characters and dialogue. You just see what you see that day, and that's based on the performance script. So that's kind of how the body works. You have your DNA that has all these genes, the source code, like everything you could need to respond to every possible situation in life. And then, depending on the scenario, your DNA gets read off into a secondary script called RNA. And then that RNA turns into the proteins, and that makes up the cells, and those are signals, and those turn into sometimes hormones, and um, they determine how we function. So let's say on Monday nights in this theater, it's like senior citizen day, and they have the early show, the matinee at like 2 p.m., and the senior citizens come out. And so they have this special printer that they call in, and they say, hey, why don't you come in and take our master script and turn it into our senior citizen script for senior citizen night? And that printer knows exactly what to do, which passages to take from the master script and include, which to cross out, which characters to get rid of, etc. But then Friday night, that's like date night, right? So you have all these young people out on dates, and they want to see something more romantic. And so then the scenes that are included in that script those are the ones that went through the romance printer. And those are the ones that are super romantic. And the plays might resemble each other, right? But they have really different features, and those differences are important. So I bring up this idea of the printer because our body has these transcriptases, and those are our printers. And so we've got a printer that can start printing our inflammatory genes. It can upregulate those inflammatory genes and get all the proteins and the cells going. And then we have printers that downregulate those genes, that turn on other genes that aren't inflammatory. And then we have factors that can go into the nucleus, or I'm going to just sort of circle on the screen here. They can touch, they connect with receptors in the surface of the nucleus, which is where all of this printing is happening. And they can send the signal, hey, inflammatory printer, work harder, print more inflammation or inflammatory factors, or they can send the signal that calms the inflammatory printer down. So it turns out, okay, are you with me?
Oh yeah, I'm keeping up.
Okay,
Up.
good. This is actually my first time trying out that whole master script metaphor.
Oh, that was awesome. That was
Okay,
great.
good.
Because we do that all the time in life. You definitely, depending on the age group and the audience and where you're located, you have to change things up. But the message still has the same standard, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
You get it.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's see. We got someone else in the room here. I'm just gonna let Gwenny in. Okay, so we've got hi Gwenny, how are you? We were just going through the slide on the screen, and I was just sort of explaining how our genes respond to the social environment to create more inflammation in our bodies. So what ends up happening, right, through this this sort of social and gene connection is that we respond to our environment. We can respond to the chemical parts of our environment or the physical parts of our environment, like we talked about the food or the pollutants, or we can respond to our social environment through cues that we pick up psychologically. And so that's where like the systems of marginalization, like racism, come in, or systems of deprivation, or even social isolation. That's how those experiences can lead to higher levels of inflammation. Our brain signals those, our brain reads those social signals as a threat. And it sets off this gigantic cascade where we release chemicals or hormones from our brain that actually act at the nucleus. And so you see the receptor here, the chemicals are connecting to the receptor, and they tell a number of different transcription factors. They tell a number of those to turn on, and they tell some others to turn off. And it's just like a pathway that it's perceived our ancestors have had for like millennia. And you remember last time we talked about how way back in the day, seeing a physical threat, seeing a leopard was enough reason for our body to ramp up inflammation and start preparing for a possible wound, because inflammation is what helps us heal wounds. And so in the social environment today, we see or we experience social threats and respond the same way. But then the threat never gets turned off, the inflammatory response never gets turned off, and we end up with chronic inflammation. It's important to know all of this and the role of the genes and the role of the nucleus, because we're about to talk about the ways that food can literally components from food can actually act as they can act at these receptors, just like in this picture, and they can turn off the transcription factors that are increasing inflammation. They can, like, you know, hamstring that printer, the inflammation printer. And so that's what we want to do, is to consistently eat those types of foods and eat those dietary patterns that are going to stop inflammation at the source. Okay. We're going to stop sharing for a second. Hi, Gwenny, how are you?
I am great, thank you.
Good, good. I know you came in a little while ago. Were you able to pick up on what we covered?
Yes, thanks.
Okay.
Yes.
Good, good, good. We're kind of getting to the meat of it now anyway, so you came at a good time. I am gonna share my screen again because so there are these 4 principles for anti-inflammatory eating. And before we get into them, we're gonna get into kind of the overarching theme, something that kind of unifies all of those principles. And we'll do that as a very quick exercise. So this is the idea of the balanced plate. I'm going to put a plate on the screen here, but you can sort of begin imagining the circle of a plate. The balanced plate is based on the USDA's My Plate. And you guys remember when we were growing up, there was the food pyramid in schools. Yeah, and it was super complicated, and you had all those levels and all the pictures crammed into the levels, and what did it even mean? So now there's this plate that's meant to help us make sense of the food groups. So essentially, the thing to remember for anti-inflammatory eating is to make sure that at least half of your plate is fruits and or veggies, non-starchy veggies. So I'm going to put that on the screen here. And can you guys see this plate?
Yes.
Okay. So do you happen to have a paper or and a pen or pencil nearby?
Yes, I'm actually writing notes now.
Okay, good. So the activity that we're going to do is just to sort of draw out our representation of this plate for the last couple meals that we ate, the last big meals. So if you haven't had dinner yet, then you can go with lunch or breakfast this morning, or you can even try dinner yesterday. And so the idea is that in a balanced plate, you get enough fruits and non-starchy veggies, because those are the things that have these polyphenols, these special compounds that can actually talk to those transcription factors we talked about and cut off inflammation in our body. And what ends up happening so commonly is we put our plate together, and you might make sure you have some veggies, but it's, like a side dish. It's not actually the majority of the meal. So this is one way for us to make sure we're getting enough of that stuff. So basically you draw out your plate, and we're going to draw the proportions based on your last big meal. What part of your plate do you think was either fruits or non-starchy veggies? Do you think you came close to that halfway mark?
Yeah.
For my breakfast, yeah, absolutely. You can go first, Miss Gwenny.
Well, I made a pot of stew, and I did not put any pasta or rice in it. Potatoes, squash, peanuts, and carrots. And then I had a wrap, but the wrap was a rice paper. It was rice paper, and inside of it I had some of the lamb that I put in the stew, and some sauteed onions, garlic, and cabbage, and with some of the lamb.
Yeah. That sounds delicious, first of all. Sounds really good. And then it sounds like you're probably coming close to or exceeding that 1/2 of veggies, right? So the trick is kind of to find the non-starchy veggies and make sure those are at least half of the plate. And so starchy veggies include, say, potatoes or winter squash like pumpkins. Um, sweet potatoes count as part of the potatoes group. We've got pumpkins, acorn squash, butternut squash, etc. So Gwenny, when you think about everything that you put into the stew, or you think about like what your bowl looked like when you scooped it out, how much of that bowl was not potatoes, not potato veggies?
Good question. So I actually did not have a bowl because I have to eat very small these days and very, very slow. And so I literally had about equivalent to 3/4 of a cup.
Okay.
Because I had it in my crock pot, so I actually for tomorrow. And
Okay.
I just wanted to taste it. Yeah, so I did not want to even have a bowl. I just wanted to taste it. So I guess like equivalent to like maybe 1/2 of a potato, if that, maybe like I guess like a potato that maybe 1.5 inches in diameter.
Yeah, so I guess the game is really proportions, right? So it ends up being less important how much you actually used, but how many veggies did you have, or how large was the veggie component compared to all the other components? Because you said there was like some lamb in the stew, so that's the protein portion of our plate, which is ideally about 1/4. And then you mentioned peanuts, and so that gets us into the 1/4 of the protein. Great, nothing wrong with any of that. And I'm wondering if you think that your non-potato veggies probably make up what, the rest of the 3/4 for the most part. You had some potatoes in there, but you probably definitely have half of that meal as veggies, right? Non-starchy veggies. What do you think, Gwenny?
I'm sorry, I was moving everything around and I mute by mistake. What was the question again?
Yeah, I'm probably belaboring the point a little bit too much, but the question was just kind of what proportion, what piece of the pie do you think is non-starchy veggies in your stew?
Probably half.
Yeah, that's great. That's excellent. That's exactly what we were going for. Half or more. Yeah. What about you, Leslie?
Well, for breakfast, I had my traditional, kale, lemon, and apples in a blender, bottle with some water, and I drunk that down. And I had an Amy's frozen dinner that was supposed to be like Indian food, and then I think I found myself stress eating because as soon as I got off work, I went and I had 2 soft shelled like bean and rice tacos. So I definitely went over my amount of like starchy or processed foods today. And that's definitely where I'm at.
That's okay. That's okay. So much of, well, first of all, good for you for recognizing the connection between your emotions and your eating choices, right? Because a lot of us aren't intuitive enough to even recognize what we're doing and then know why we're doing it. And then, you know, I've talked to both of you all before. You know, our goal here is not to guilt you out of eating certain foods. The idea is really to just sort of add as many good foods as possible, the things that build us up as much as possible. And when we do that, we end up crowding out a lot of the unnecessary stuff. But it also means that you can, you know, have your super carby burrito if you want. And you can have your French fries. You can, right? You can indulge and still have some balance because you have loaded up the rest of your day or the rest of your week with the stuff that really builds you up. So, all right. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to share, let's see. Okay, this morning, this is a good example. This morning I had an egg and mushroom biscuit. There were no fruits or veggies in it. And then I added on a pear. So I'm just gonna kind of draw that. I think I would probably say it's like, so I probably had mainly grains or starch, just under half. And then I probably had like the egg or the protein took up kind of the other portion. And maybe it was a big pear. So maybe I give myself 25%, but that's probably a stretch. So I could really have done a lot more earlier today, to make sure I was getting the polyphenols or that anti-inflammatory plant magic. And so tonight I'm going to be eating just a really big salad with some of the spices that I'm going to tell you about in a second. All right, so we're going to share the screen again. Any thoughts there, guys?
Yeah, so my
you were drawing your portions.
Oh, what'd you say?
You got it, Miss Gwynny. You got it, Miss Gwynny.
Oh, no, I was just saying that I mean, when I say literally, I have actually had to teach myself how to eat, how to chew, and how to swallow, how to drink water. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. I realized one of the reasons why I was having an upset stomach is because I wasn't swallowing properly.
Okay.
It's really scary because now what I do is I literally, like, I chewed my food yesterday because I was at the hospital. I'm doing all these appointments. Thanks for you know, you suggesting see a doctor. So I have a boatload getting everything checked out. Okay, I had a small bowl of beef stew. It was very small, a little bit, maybe 3/4 of a cup at the hospital. And I literally, it took me like 25 minutes to eat that small cup. Yeah. And I'm chewing things like 30 and 40 and 50 times. I'm counting it. And and one of the things I wasn't doing was I wasn't swishing the food around my mouth. I was eating on one side of my mouth. And I thought, maybe if I eat very slow and switch the food from left to right and just chew with all of my teeth, I can stir up the saliva and swallow very slowly. So since I do that, no upset stomach at all.
Okay.
And I really can only do one meal. It's very scary because food has been such a large part of my life that I realized that my stomach is at its best with one meal, which is usually like 2:00 in the afternoon. So in the morning, it's like I'm slowly drinking water. And when I say slowly, I'm talking about drip, drop, drip, drop. So I'm sitting at my laptop with water. I put the water in my mouth and it takes like about an entire minute to allow myself to sip on the water. I know this is extreme, I will see. But I'm trying to stimulate the
acid in my mouth to help me digest the
Yeah.
food. I think I was just eating too fast, and my acid just couldn't catch up and couldn't produce.
Yeah,
I'm being way too honest.
No, this is a safe space. I appreciate you sharing. I have to remind you, you know, this is being recorded. Folks will see this, people who missed, people who signed up but weren't able to attend this. But I know you, Gwenny, and I know that you've shared in the past, and so you don't mind.
Yeah, I want to be honest so people can, you know, because some of the hidden little crazy habits that might be helpful to people, because most people feel like they're normal. And sometimes we really don't know the crazy stuff that we're doing that's making us gain weight or get sick and stuff like that. So that's why I'm trying to be honest.
Yeah,
Because
no,
I didn't think I had, you know,
I
yeah,
appreciate you
issues
sharing,
with eating.
especially while we're talking about eating, right? Because digestion's a really big part of eating. It's what allows the nutrients from food to actually enter our bodies and do us good. And so, yeah, chewing multiple times, sometimes 30 seconds before we swallow, making sure we've actually broken down the food can be really important. Taking small portions at a time and just paying attention to our stomachs when we feel full, and sort of eating mindfully in that way. You get kudos too, just like we did for Leslie, for paying attention to your body and what's happening when you eat your food. We just, as a whole, I think we don't do that enough. So good for you too. Really quickly, so I want to make sure that we cover some of these basics of eating for anti-inflammatory benefit. And I talked about those polyphenols before. I call them plant magic, because we don't hear a ton about them, but they do really great things. Polyphenols are actually plant medicines, though. They are like the nutrients that we talk about food having. They are like, you know, fat um, uh, or sugar, right, or fiber, but they are a different sort of compound and typically much smaller than those larger macronutrients. They are the chemicals that give veggies and fruits their vibrant colors usually, and in some cases their smells. So polyphenols are actually the chemicals that plant cells have created to protect themselves. So you have some polyphenols that are antimicrobial. They protect the plant cells from fungus, from parasites. You have some that are photoprotective. They protect the plant cells from damaging sunlight, UVB rays. And then you've got polyphenols that are super antioxidant or anti-inflammatory. And again, benefit the plant's own cells. So then it turns out, they're living creatures, we're living creatures. It turns out that when we eat these veggies and fruits with polyphenols in them, we can benefit in some similar ways. So you've got, you've got antioxidants in the form of vitamins A, C, and E. And the kind of the components that are the provitamins to A, C, and E are called polyphenols. And so things like beta carotene, you probably heard of as the provitamin A. And those are chemicals that have antioxidant capabilities and are heart healthy for that reason. And so it's really important when we're talking about anti-inflammatory plants to think about these 4 spices that we can commonly use when we're cooking foods. They're delicious. We're probably already using them, but this is just to highlight their value so we can pump them even more. And these power 4 are peppers, so spicy peppers that give you capsaicin. They are turmeric, which gives you curcumin. They are onions, particularly red onions or shallots, that give you a type of flavonoid called quercetin. And then there's garlic, which gives you an organosulfur compound called Allison. Each of these actually has a direct interaction with that inflammation printer, I don't know if I said the name earlier, but there's this major inflammation printer in our bodies called NF kappa B, and capsaicin, curcumin, quercetin, and allicin can enter the nucleus or act at the border of the nucleus through receptors and just like pounce on the nuclear transcript, or pounce on that inflammatory printer. And so these are just incredibly powerful anti-inflammatory compounds for that very reason. They stop inflammation at the source. There are other types of foods that act farther downstream, like once inflammatory molecules have been created, these chemicals can sort of inhibit their action. But these are just a few of many other whole foods, plants that give you plant magic that can disrupt inflammation at the source. And so it turns out really quickly for capsaicin, the hotter the pepper, the more capsaicin you get. So if you're someone who likes spicy foods to begin with, and you can tolerate spicy foods. So Gwenny, if we're talking about like dyspepsia or gastritis for you, spicy foods might make matters worse for you. I'll leave that up to you to decide and to discuss with your doc, but something for you to know is that habanero is one of the spiciest or one of the peppers that has the highest level of capsaicin. And then you've got bell peppers sort of at the bottom of the list, having practically no capsaicin. I mean, bell peppers are more sweet than they are spicy usually. We've got curcumin that you find in turmeric. So you can get this in turmeric root, fresh or dried. It's actually, it metabolizes just as well, either fresh or dry. And the benefit of getting it dry is that it lasts longer. And it's actually, for all of these dried spices, it's more concentrated. So you're going to get more of the active ingredient in a smaller amount. You'll need to add just a little bit of black pepper when you use turmeric to help the curcumin be absorbed in the gut.
Oh, what about,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
is cumin in that ballpark?
That's a good question. There is a certain amount of curcumin in cumin, but they are actually two different spices. Turmeric and cumin are two different spices.
Okay, that's what I put in my. I'm sorry.
Cumin? That's what you put
No,
in
I was
the
just
stew?
saying pepper and the turmeric is what I had put in the stew.
Yeah. Oh, turmeric. There you go.
Yeah. We have a delay in the did you notice that?
I keep
the
talking
reception
over
that
you.
Well, no, the reception is it presents a delay. I'm looking.
Okay.
I'm using my phone, so I think the reception is kind of.
Okay.
But I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No worries, no worries. All right, we've got our quercetin, which we talked about being especially prominent in onions. Onions, so red onions and shallots. Shallots actually have the highest concentration of quercetin, and you can find it in its highest levels raw, in the raw food, or in the lightly cooked food. So you'd want to ideally, saute over low heat, saute your onions over low heat, possibly boil them. Frying at high heat, of course, degrades higher amounts of the quercetin, so you end up getting not as much of that really great benefit from it. And then we've got Allison in garlic and in onions. So Allison is this really funky compound. It's a sulfur compound that has really strong antioxidant and anti-inflammatory action. It's the thing that makes you cry when you cut onions, or if you cut a ton of garlic, you might start tearing up there too. The thing to know about Allison, there's this 10-minute rule. I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but in order to get the most Allison out of your garlic or your onions, don't put them in heat until at least 10 minutes after you've cut or mashed them. Because the way that Allison is formed is it doesn't just exist in the raw garlic or the raw onion. There are actually a couple different compounds in the raw onion and the raw garlic that have to work together and create this enzymatic reaction to make the Allison, which is super beneficial to us. And so those chemicals don't get started doing their job until the tissue of the onion or the garlic is damaged. So if you, depending on how you cook your garlic, I don't know if you smash it first or you actually dice it, but either way, you want to just sort of set your really quick timer, take note of the time, and then wait at least 10 minutes for that Allison to form. That's about how long it takes. Otherwise, if you introduce those precursor chemicals to heat, you cook it before the Allison is formed, then they actually just break up and they don't form Allison, and we miss out on all that anti-inflammatory benefit. Okay. So those are the really big tips, and then I'm gonna go through a couple, three actually, sort of principles. The first one we talked about, that would have been our fourth one, is that 50% fruits and veggies rule, just to make sure you're getting enough of those polyphenols throughout the day. And then just a note about piling on the polyphenols, piling on the fruits and veggies, is that the rainbow, eating the rainbow is really beneficial because each of these types of polyphenols shows up in the skin of the fruit or veggies. So you can see kind of what's most predominant in blackberries, for example. Blackberries, blueberries, strawberries are really prominent in different types of flavonoids. And then, you can see beta carotene, that provitamin A, in yellow tinted or orange tinted veggies like carrots or sweet potatoes. And so you want to make sure that you're not just getting one thing all the time, right? You want variety. So then the next tip, just sort of moving up on this list, would be choosing healthy fats. And then this is something that we talked about. You were both in our Share and Savor course, actually. So you already gone over this. You know that we've got our saturated fats, we've got our unsaturated fats. Generally, the unsaturated fats are the heart healthy ones, but the unsaturated fats are the ones that come from plants. You can get some saturated fats from plants, like from coconut oil, but primarily from meat, you're getting saturated fats, except for the unsaturated omega-3s that are in fish. So you basically want to choose those whole plant fats, optimize for those, use plant oils like olive oil when you're cooking on low heat, or avocado oil when you're cooking on higher heat. In order to get those unsaturated fats, would prioritize those over butter or shortening, which, is also more likely to have meat or animal fats in it. And then, you know, in the Share and Savor course, we talked about using things like spirulina to get very high quality omega-3s, eating microalgae as a way to get those high quality omega-3s that you would otherwise get from fish. But if you're not completely plant-based and you're eating fish, then you can certainly try the fatty fish like salmon, tuna, and mackerel to get those heart healthy omega-3s. The next thing, I'm gonna just scroll up here. You with me? Okay, that makes sense.
You said salmon, tuna, what was the other one?
And mackerel. Those are some of the fattiest fish that are gonna have omega-3s in them. So then the next thing is to sort of focus on whole foods. And we've spent some time talking about whole foods, but you know, the way to recognize a whole food is, you know, you pick it up and you think to yourself, is this the way it would have fallen off a tree or grown out of the ground, you know, before it was washed? And so an example of that is like an orange that still has the peel on it. This is how it would have been plucked from the tree. If you get the orange from a grocery store and it's say cut in half, it's quartered, that's minimally processed. It hasn't actually changed the quality of the orange or the content, right? It's nutrition content, but there has been something done to it. It's been chopped, it's minimally processed. If you were to eat orange juice, if you were to buy orange juice from the store, especially orange juice from concentrate, then you're talking about a higher level of processing. And what happens as we go through the processing process, as we process foods, we end up, you know, doing two things. One, we lose a lot of the good stuff. We lose a lot of those polyphenols are degraded in the process of like heating and separating parts of the food. And then we also lose the really helpful macronutrients like fiber. That ends up getting lost when you, with sort of every level of processing, and especially when you go from an orange to orange juice. Then the other thing that happens with processing is we tend to add extra stuff. The extra stuff that manufacturers add, you can imagine, is not the healthiest. They're not adding it for our health usually. They're adding it for taste or for the benefit of shelf life. And so it either has no nutritive value, it's basically air, it doesn't do anything, or it has a negative nutritive value. And that negative nutritive value, especially if it's, you know, not an unsaturated fat, it's a less heart healthy fat, it's an added sugar or a free sugar, that's actually going to increase our levels of inflammation. So the safe way to eat inflammatory and anti-inflammatory diet is to really prioritize those whole foods and those less processed foods as much as possible. Can we eat more processed foods every once in a while? Absolutely. The focus would be on trying to crowd out using those whole foods. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it does.
Okay. And then sort of related to this spectrum here, moving from the orange to the orange juice to the orange soda, is watching your sugar. So we can have sweets, we can have plenty of naturally sweetened foods, fruits, for example, without seeing any negative outcomes on our health. I mean, the data is pretty remarkable. If you were to eat an orange or a whole fruit, and then measure your inflammatory markers, measure your blood sugar afterwards, and then if you were to either drink juice or drink orange soda that has the same amount of sugar in it as the orange did, and then you measure all the same markers, you're going to see higher blood sugar after the juice and the soda. You're going to see higher levels of inflammatory markers, which is what happens when your blood sugar spikes. And so pretty consistently, researchers have found no negative outcomes from, no negative impact from eating plenty of sweet fruits. So the trick here is to try to prioritize the whole food sugars. And that means as we're making our smoothies, as we're like preparing tea and coffee, even with baking, where can we get creative about adding sweet fruit? Gwenny, can you think of any substitutions you can make, or are you already doing this?
But a sweetener to use for like our smoothie?
Yeah. Like, I'll give you an example. So this is something I started maybe a year or two ago. So I drink a lot of tea, and it's nice to have sweet tea. Most of the time I don't use any sweetener, but especially now it's like freezing outside. Winter is pretty miserable right now. I've been going easy on myself and drinking my tea with something sweet in it. But I want to avoid the inflammatory surge of like adding agave or honey or table sugar. So instead of adding those, I add a whole date. And so I keep dates in the pantry, and I take the date out, and I take the pit out and put it in my hot tea and just sort of mash it up. And it ends up releasing its sugar. It ends up sweetening the tea, but it releases its own polyphenols, which will help my body to metabolize the sugar so my blood sugar doesn't spike and cause an inflammatory surge. And then, at the end of the thing, I drink up the smashed date, and so I get that fiber as well. That's kind of an example of one way I've tried to shift to make sure I can push as much good stuff in there as possible.
I love that idea. It's almost like a replacement for bubble tea, where you get the treat at the bottom of the tea,
Yes.
but it's like fruit.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
That's true.
I have a lot of raspberries and blueberries, so I could put that in my tea.
Yeah. So blueberries will probably be sweeter than raspberries. If you put blueberries in your tea, let me know. I haven't tried that. I think it's probably going to change the character of your tea quite a bit. It'll be more than just a sweetener. But one place that blueberries are a really good substitute is in smoothies. So if you have ripe blueberries or even frozen blueberries, that can add a lot of sweetness. So, I mean, those are our main things, guys. You're going to keep getting texts about this for the rest of the week, sort of re-emphasizing what we discussed. We've got our Power 4 flavors. Add these as much as you possibly can, as much as you can tolerate them. Hot peppers, turmeric, along with black pepper, garlic, and onions, waiting 10 minutes to make sure that your Allison forms. And then these 4 principles to sort of look out for, make sure that you prioritize whole foods as much as possible whenever you have an opportunity to grab those whole foods. Make sure that you are prioritizing whole sugars and avoiding that blood sugar spike, which increases levels of inflammation. Make sure that you're choosing the fats, the unsaturated fats that are actually anti-inflammatory fats in olive oil and avocado and, you know, the fatty fish like salmon. And then, you know, when you sit down to a meal, and this is something I obviously need to work on too, ask yourself, is 50% of my plate fruits or non-starchy veggies? And if it's not, see if you can't add a little bit more of those fruits and veggies or switch out some of the other stuff to shift the proportions. Okay, guys. That's all I got. Any questions?
The black pepper,
Great
did you say add
information.
that? Yeah, add the black pepper with the pepper, turmeric, onion, and garlic combination. You were saying to add to bring
Yeah,
out.
so so that black pepper, remember the black pepper plus the turmeric is going to be really important for absorption.
Okay.
That helps you absorb the turmeric. But honestly, yeah, that combination of four, the red onion, garlic, turmeric, and capsaicin peppers, I use all the time. I mean, I just love that combination of food. It works in so many different types of cuisine. Like it, you know, it works for Mexican, it works for kind of South Asian, whether you're doing a curry. Like you said, Gwynny, works in stews of all sorts. So yeah, that's and all those flavors they work pretty well together. So I like those as kind of just like a spice packet to kind of add an anti-inflammatory punch to meals.
Oh, that's awesome. So if
Okay.
I were to make like a broth with the pepper, because my stomach is not sensitive to the pepper, you know, is so I just bought this big bag the other day by coincidence. So if I were to like just make like a cup of broth, say like at 12 noon, that would help me in some ways, right? I mean, like as far as like, of course, weight loss and just overall.
If you were to make a cup of broth,
With that spicy pepper, yeah.
well, so this is the thing, right? I'm reluctant to advise you to use a ton of pepper because a lot of your issue has been
Oh,
digestion,
right.
and that can actually upset your stomach. So for you, Gwenny, it might be a good idea to try these other things actually, as opposed to the spicy pepper, or at least not a broth that is only spicy pepper.
Yeah, I was about to go all in with
Yeah.
the pepper. You saw that, right? Yeah.
Oh, okay. I mean, any other questions? Those are really good ones.
Yeah, I have a lot of great notes, so
Okay.
you answered
Good,
everything
good.
thoroughly.
All
Yeah,
right.
got 3 pages of notes.
Oh my gosh. I don't know how you did that. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Gwenny. Well, you have a good day. We'll leave it at that, and you'll get, you know, texts on this stuff for the rest of the day then.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Sure. Bye-bye.